As Marlon said, I'm here to talk about Lonnie and our efforts to revitalize communities through neighborhood revitalization through community engagement. So how many of you have been familiar with Lonnie previously? A little bit? A little bit. Okay, some people. All right, so as you heard, Lonnie was formed after the civil unrest or the riots that followed the Rodney King verdicts. And I can figure out my thing here. So we were established then, and right now we are celebrating our 20th anniversary, which is a big milestone for us. Originally, we were slated to be a demonstration project, and we were supposed to last for 3 years. That was the mayor's office's intention. And our founding executive director had no intention of having it last only 3 years. And so she wisely put lots of things in place to make it sustainable. And so we have been improving neighborhoods all throughout Los Angeles for 20 years now, and we've grown steadily. We started out really with primarily transportation dollars and have expanded greatly since then and have a much broader reach than we originally did. So you'll see a map in a little bit that shows that we are really all throughout the Los Angeles area and doing projects primarily in the most challenged neighborhoods. We try to go where our improvement projects, our physical improvements, will have the greatest impact for people living in those neighborhoods. As I'm sure you are well aware, there's an abundance of vacant lots and unsafe streets and just a lot of dangerous, less than stellar conditions out there. The condition of sidewalks has been getting a lot of press lately, which we actually like to see because people are paying attention to it. It's a huge problem. Things even like tree trimming services. You know, the city is just so backlogged with its capacity to deliver kind of basic services. We're kind of at a point where it's difficult to assess who should be responsible for these things in order to get these things done, to make it a livable community. So what we do is really the basis of our whole organization is really to engage community members. And the whole reason that Mayor Reardon wanted to form Lonnie 20 years ago was because there was such a gulf between community members in some of the really economically challenged neighborhoods in Los Angeles and city government. And there was no dialogue really that was effectively working. Some of these neighborhoods, even at that time, after the Watts riots, had been studied and studied, but neighborhoods weren't really feeling it, that there was really a connection and that any of the improvements had anything to do with what they thought they actually needed. And so the idea was for Lonnie to come in and bridge that gap, to be the go-between, to really give community members a voice in the planning process and have physical improvements that really reflected what their own needs were. And our premise has always been that the people who live in a neighborhood know best what it is they need. They're acquainted with the day-to-day routines, the coming and goings of a neighborhood, and what they need. If they need park space, if they need better crime prevention measures, if they need better transportation access, if they need safer streets, better sidewalks, all of those things. So we involved them to what was really an unprecedented level to be involved in that decision-making process. So here we have a couple of examples that are actually pretty close by geographically. We have the Normandy Cordova project, where you see a little later slide of the actual park space. What we did here, we got park money. This is one of, I don't know if you're familiar with Recreation and Parks Department. They have a 50 Parks initiative. This is one of the 50 parks. And it is a very small lot. What happened when they widened Normandy is that they took half a lot for the street widening, so they were left with a half lot that was pretty much unusable space. And this is often where Lonnie will come in, when there's just unusable surplus space that nobody really has a function for, and we can make it work for the neighborhood. So we were able to get state parks money to convert this into a park. So we did a bus tour on a Saturday, and this is kind of an example of getting people out in their own neighborhoods to really figure it out. We got 40 people involving a lot of children who will actually use the park space, and went on a bus tour. What they did in the beginning is the designer that was hired had them take a rope and measure with a rope the size of that actual space. And then when they went to other park spaces on the bus tour and visited those, they were able to take that rope out and make the same space configuration so they could see realistically what the configuration was, what their options were space-wise to incorporate the elements that they'd like to see. So these are kids sketching out the designs they'd like to see. Everybody has a voice at the table there to put their 2 cents in. And it really made it real for them to go to the other parks, to see what was available, to see how other parks function, and it gave them a very real sense of being able to incorporate the elements that would work best for them. In the next slide here at the Koreatown Gateway Project, I don't know how well you can tell, there are 2 models there that people are looking at. And what we did here, this is on Irolo and Normandy in Koreatown. And you can see the Koreatown Pavilion that we built several years ago now. We're building on that. What we do often is multi-generational projects where we establish an improvement and we are able to leverage that and build on that with further improvements down the road. So this is what we're doing here. We're having the community here decide between what they call a secret garden. It's very popular in Korea. It's a place for meditation and to just kind of escape the daily hectic life. And this is Normandy and Irolo, so it's hectic. And then there was also the idea of a transit plaza. So people from the community are invited to come out and see the models and vote on what they would like to see. And as a draw, food is always a draw. Keep that in mind. You want to offer food to people. It brings them out. So we had a taco truck at this, and it's out in the neighborhood, out in the street. So you bring people who weren't even necessarily invited on the steering committee, people who didn't even know about it. They're just drawn, there's a taco truck out there on a Saturday morning. So they come to see what's going on. They're in the neighborhood, and they get to look at those models, hear the designer's spiel. That's the architect there on the far left. And so he explains the 2 different models, and if they listen to all that and vote, then they get a ticket to take to the taco truck. So it really gets people to be involved, to hear it, where they otherwise might just pass by, and gets a lot more involvement. So those are a couple of the methods we do there. So for every project of whatever nature it might be, whether it's a park or transportation corridor improvements, facade improvements, whatever the physical improvement might be, the basic fundamental structure is always the same, that we form a project steering committee, which is comprised of stakeholders in any local neighborhood. And that's going to change for whatever the project might be. It can be a homeowners association group, it can be neighborhood councils, business improvement districts, store owners, merchants, homeowners, schools, churches, whatever groups are represented there. That's where we try to pull from to get representation on the steering committee. And it's usually about 10 to 12 people to keep it an efficient working group. And that group of 10 to 12, they act as essentially constituent representatives for their larger communities. So the idea is that throughout a design and construction process, that these steering committee members would then go back to their, let's say, neighborhood council or their business improvement district or their church or their homeowners association. And they report back on the progress of the project. They solicit feedback from their larger entity and bring that back to our next steering committee meeting. And periodically throughout the course of a project, we will also have larger community meetings where people are invited to come and see for themselves what's happening and to provide their own feedback to the designer and to us. But the idea is that this small working group is what really keeps it moving to be efficient. And it goes beyond just input to where they're actually substantive decision makers. Because unlike the model of a lot of other nonprofit entities, or certainly the city, it is the members of the project steering committee who actually will select a design team, let's say. We will prepare an RFQ, a request for qualifications, and many of our community members would be completely unfamiliar with that entire concept and what that is. So we educate them on that. They learn how the RFQ process works. They review that. Then we solicit statements of qualifications from interested designers. And then it's the steering committee members who, with our guidance, go through and evaluate the different statements of qualifications. They select their top 3 candidates, and then they actually interview the candidates and select the design firm. And it may be an architect, it may be a landscape design firm, whatever the project calls for. But that's the level to which these stakeholders are participating in the process, which is pretty unique. And so that really engenders a tremendous level of buy-in because people are fully invested in the process. They are making the decisions. They don't feel like it's being imposed upon them by the government. So we've had great success doing it that way. Here are a couple of examples of this type of outreach. A site walk in Boyle Heights. We're doing a First Street Arts District project. And we started thinking that we would be doing street medallions, which is similar to street banners for community identification, and that's not really what they wanted, and so they're really redefining it and putting in elements that work more for that neighborhood. And here on Virgil Village, another place where we had the taco trucks, people that we just put it along the fences there so people could come and look at the different plans and vote on them, and again, once they vote, they get their ticket for the taco truck and they can go eat. So again, bringing in a lot more people just than the steering committee because you're out on the street and really engaging people who are just passing by in the community. We had one project, to contrast this, we had one project where the funder required us to do all of the meetings, all of the outreach in a hotel ballroom that was local to the neighborhood. And it doesn't play the same way. People don't get the same feeling. They're not out where the project is. You want people to walk the site, to actually feel it and see what the site conditions are and see what would work for them. And we do all kinds of different things. We may have Post-its that go along a board to show different improvements that are available, or they may take pictures as they go along and say what's important to them. When you're in a hotel ballroom, it doesn't work quite the same way. And there's really no way to achieve that in that kind of sterile environment compared to being out in the community. And when you have contentious projects, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which often you do, there are competing interests in almost all of these projects. People are very opinionated on what they want to see. These neighborhoods are very dense. There are very different types of groups represented, all of who want to see their vision reflected there. So when you have a contentious situation, you don't want to be in a hotel ballroom just talking at people. You want to have them out where you can have a dialogue on the street. In that case with the hotel ballroom, it got to the point at one meeting that hotel security felt it was getting too tense. They called LAPD. LAPD came in and lined the perimeter of the room in this stance like this, that it just couldn't have been further from what we needed to really build some consensus in the room. It was intimidating, and they were around the whole perimeter. It's not what you want to go for. So, lessons learned, no more hotel ballrooms. And so these are examples of just ways we do that. We do some social media outreach here. I wanted to talk about that just for a moment. A lot of the populace we're working with is not necessarily Facebook savvy and Twitter savvy and all of that. So it's more limited with us than it might be with some entities. We do have a Facebook presence, and we do try to be green and do things electronically. But a lot of people, I'd say still about 1/2 of our database doesn't have an email address, which is hard to believe in this day and age, but that's still the reality of the conditions we're dealing with. So we still literally go door to door, knocking on doors, literally, one door at a time. We do mailers, we go to community centers, senior centers, libraries to get the word out. And we do try to also reach out to people, especially the newer generations of people, with Facebook and different social media efforts. Now this is a technical advisory committee, I feel, one of the things that really makes the whole process work for us. And we've kind of built this up over the years. What this is the technical advisory group works as parallel entity to this project steering committee. And this group is made up of representatives from public agencies that would have a role in a project, whether that be recreation and parks, cultural affairs, street services, public works, whatever it might be for the nature of the project we're doing. It might be transportation quite often. We have a representative at the table throughout the planning process at every step of the way. And the reason this is so important is it really goes both ways. It puts a face to the city departments for the people on the steering committee. It gives them an actual human being to converse with about what's feasible, what's not feasible, what they'd like to see, what they don't want to see come into their neighborhood. And for the public side, it really puts a face to the project and what people are looking for. So it's not quite as easy to just do a rubber stamp no. You know, it really personalizes it on both sides. And it's really that it works on both sides that has made it so effective. We find that people are much more likely on the public side to try to make something work because now they've been going to these meetings, they're invested in it, they want to see it be successful as well. And if there is something like, let's say somebody wants a mid-block crosswalk on a busy intersection and Department of Transportation is never going to approve it, DOT is there to explain why it's not feasible, why it's a dangerous situation, why statistics show that there would be too many accidents in that crosswalk, and they can explain it, which is a much better situation than simply hearing the city won't let us do it. So I am a firm believer that having this parallel group serve as the technical advisory committee is really critical to make these things successful. This is just a map to show you kind of where we are throughout the city, and in many of these areas we have, as I mentioned before, multi-generational projects. So we keep building on the projects that we've implemented originally. But these are the different types of things we do: transportation and pedestrian corridor improvements, business district revitalization, which is often facade improvements to try to clean up a commercial facade group of buildings so that they're more they look nicer, they're more appealing to go patronize, it makes the street environment safer. You know, it all builds upon itself, of course. When you make that safer and you draw more people in, you get more people on the street, it just creates a safer environment by having positive uses instead of negative. So, and then we also do development and support of the community organizations so that once our seed funding is over, the idea is that people will be able to go on and maintain those improvements and also build on them and create additional improvements. So excuse me here for a quick second. This is a transit enhancement example that we love. This is one of our favorites. This is the gateway to the Kenny Hahn State Recreation Area. Has anybody been to that Kenny Hahn Park? You have a few people. Kenny Hahn Park has some of the very best views in all of Los Angeles. And it's like this hidden gem that people, for the most part, don't even know about. It's somewhere around 20 acres, and you can go up to the top and have just fantastic views of the city. So it's right off of La Cienega, which is practically a freeway at that point. And so we were asked to do like a decorative bridge to lure people in, to really make people see that it's there, because really people don't even notice that there's an entrance there to this Kenny Hahn Park. They're just flying down La Cienega. So we hired actually an artist, Cliff Garton, who did a beautiful job on this. There's landscaping on the edges, but it's really eye-catching, and the idea of a gateway, of course, is to make people stop and notice that you're entering into a specific neighborhood, usually, in this case, into a recreational area. And the idea here was designed to show like the flow of the water and reflect nature in that, and it's been extremely well received. It used to be chain link, so this has been a great improvement, and it's illuminated partially at night, which just adds to it dramatically. More transit enhancements. And I should mention on that previous slide, we also did a lot of wayfinding signage within the Kenny Hahn Park, because you want people to be able to find where they're going. It's a big space, and wayfinding can be really important and make a real difference for people who are visiting and make it much more appealing to be able to go back if they can find where they're trying to go. More transit enhancements here. That's Councilman Mitch O'Farrell there with the big golden scissors. And so we did a conceptual plan there. And this is at the ribbon cutting of the bike lane that went in. And then on the right, you can see the bike lane there. And so, excuse me. So this was an exciting result that stemmed from a conceptual plan document that we did to see what it was that the Virgil Village community would like. And again, it was kind of a little different than the assumptions we went in with, but listening to the community, as busy as it is over there, they really wanted a road diet, and they wanted a park across the street. There's a Bureau of Street Lighting lot that they'd like to turn into a park, so we're still seeking money to make that happen. It would be, again, one of those phased projects where we try to do one step at a time. Much easier to get the construction dollars when you have a plan that you have complete community buy-in for. So once we did the conceptual plan and were able to show what the community wanted so strongly, the city actually went ahead, without us having to get the funding, the city went ahead to do that bike lane there. And so that was very exciting. That's, again, when things can be leveraged, you know, everybody wins. This is an example, kind of a phased approach here. This is in North Hollywood on Lankershim and Magnolia. And this was one of our first projects, actually, and it was very successful. This lot just had a pole in the ground as a bus stop, and no shelter, no trash can, nothing. And the vacant lot here behind it, really the only use that was going on was drug sales and the like. It was just criminal activity. There was no positive use, really. And so that's a major transit line along there, right at Magnolia and Lankershim. And so we came in and put in the transit amenities first. We put in a shelter. We put in lighting because nobody wanted to stand there after dark and take that bus with nothing around but that kind of traffic. And so we were able to put in, you can see the shelter there on the, oh, I forgot I had a little pointer here, don't I? You can see the shelter right here that we put in, and an information kiosk, which is what the community wanted to be able, it's an arts district there. They have a lot of small theater plays, and they wanted to be able to highlight that, tell what was going on in the community. Because what the community really envisioned was that this would be a community gathering space. And so they wanted to be able to highlight what was happening, what was upcoming, let people know, and be a reason for people to come into that area. So eventually, we were able to partner with, this was a CRA project that we worked on, and we were able to attract Pit Fire Pizza, which has now expanded greatly and is very popular. And what the community said they wanted is if a food service contractor was going to come in, they didn't want just a restaurant that was going to be set back with just a brick wall around it. It had to have patio space. It had to serve as that community space, as a gathering space for people who lived there or visited there. And so that's what they did. They were able to get Pit Fire to come in, bring an outside patio area. And we need to go back out there and take a new after picture, because these trees are so much more lush now. It is so green. It's lovely out there. And what a difference from the image on the left. And it's been enormously successful. And the group that we worked with, our project steering committee in this case, was so successful that they went on. They were so excited about what happened here that they went on and formed as their own nonprofit 501c3, and they went on to build other improvement areas, physical improvements in the area, which is exactly the kind of catalytic effect you're always hoping to have. In this case, are you guys familiar with the Byzantine Latino quarter? It's Pico Union area. It's right on Pico, and Hoover and Pico and Normandy are the two we've done transit plazas in. The St. Sophia's Orthodox Cathedral is right here on this corner. Oh. Whoops, wrong way. Okay, so the cathedral would be right over here, and that's just a huge anchor in this neighborhood. And this is a billboard that Cultural Affairs did on the side of a beacon storage thing years ago, and it's lovely. It says something to the effect of, "We are all angels with one wing, we must embrace to be able to fly." So it's supposed to be good community messaging there. So what we did, this is an incredibly busy transportation corridor in here. It's very, very dense. This is one of the most dense neighborhoods in the city, and it's populated largely by Central American immigrants who are very transitory. It's often a first stage landing place for people, and then they move on and go somewhere else. So with that population, it can sometimes be difficult to get physical improvements, for people to maintain them, to take real ownership of them. And so it's been somewhat of a challenging neighborhood. And so what we did here is we closed off this right turn lane, and we filled it in to be a transit plaza here. And you can't even see, this is a decorative clock that's just beautiful. And this project so far exceeded our expectations. It was just lovely, because people now come here and use this whole space essentially as their front porch. People come out, they have coffee out here, they meet people for breakfast out here, they play chess or checkers, they come out here during the day just to get some quote-unquote fresh air. And let me tell you, if anybody had ever said when it was in this condition, which the rest of the boulevard is, that people would come out to just voluntarily have their cup of coffee out there, nobody would have ever believed it, certainly not Lonnie. So this is an amazing transformation of how you can just develop a community gathering space to really be embraced by people and make them want to come out and create positive uses out of a physical space. That was just, this was completely underused, just surplus space that had no purpose. So this is now a much better use that people are thoroughly enjoying. And then we've done another one a few blocks away because of the success of this, so really building upon that. In Highland Park, this is an example, again, multi-generational. This is a shelter that we put in back in '94. And right now we're in the process of working with the community on deciding what improvements they'd like to say. This was through a federal appropriation that we got some years ago. And what the community has decided here is that they would like to see decorative mosaic tile put into the street. And there's, I'm going to forget the term for it now. There's a new technology so that this is basically immune to people chipping out the tiles or graffitiing it. And it's just a wonderful way to represent the history of the neighborhood. So the project steering committee members were very excited to be able to do this. It's a historical image in there. It reflects on the history. This is on Figueroa between Avenue 50 and 60. And lots of history there. And so it's just a wonderful way to tie it together and really bring that community feel. Because we want people to feel like it's a home, you know, that it's not just some busy corridor. And so they have ownership of it and take pride in it. And through efforts like this, that's really how they achieve that. So one of the things that Lonnie has focused on over the years is really bringing consensus, as I mentioned before, on groups with varying priorities. And so this is a project on Vernon and Central, where the history of this area, the Dunbar Hotel is down there, and that is where African American jazz players stayed when they were playing in downtown jazz clubs back in the Jazz Age. And it was just a hub of African American music and activities and vibrant scene. And over the years, it kind of wasn't as united a front there. And so things kind of dissipated. And eventually, there was more of a Latino presence came in. And the guitar represents the changing musical demographic of the neighborhood as it went more into Latino-themed music and culture throughout that whole neighborhood. So when we came in to do some street improvements, there was quite a bit of tension of saying, this is the old jazz corridor. We're going to preserve that. If we're going to talk about community identity, that is the identity of this neighborhood. And then you have a lot of more recent immigrants who are saying, well, that may be fine as a nod to history, but that's not what it is today. And we're here, and we want to be reflected in this. This is who we are today. This is the identity of the neighborhood. So a lot of what we do has to do with bridging these gaps, kind of the same between City Hall and the neighborhoods, is bringing consensus to different cultures in a neighborhood, because the cultural landscapes are shifting all the time. And so rather than have people feuding about that, the idea is to really bring them together and find some common ground. And so what we were able to do here is, you can see on the street banner that the community helped design. They're the ones who determine what goes on to these things. Oh, I did it again. They chose to put harmony in diversity as a reflection back to the musical era there, musical cultural relevance, and moving forward while looking back. So some of the banners had saxophones and some have guitars. And then we did these illuminated street sculptures here at, say, Central Avenue, and one is the guitar and one is the saxophone, again as a nod to both cultures. And what you have now is an annual festival that fully embraces both and is very, very well attended by both. And it's just really wonderful to see the community coming together and not being divided over something like this. So that's what we're striving to do in all of our projects. Some have that kind of issue more than others, but that was certainly one that was very predominant. And then in the West Adams district, this is just an example of, this is kind of an anchor building here in West Adams, on Normandy and Adams. And this is the dental building that was in some disrepair here. This is the old facade, and we did new facades over here with consistent signage and paint, just to make it again more appealing so that people would want to patronize the businesses within and bring people to the neighborhood for a positive use. So we have done a lot of facade improvements throughout the city to try to serve as a business corridor catalyst. And here's an example in the Fairfax Fairfax Avenue Ethiopian Business District. This is very similar to what we had in Vernon Central. Here we had a long-standing Jewish community in the Fairfax district, and then much more recently, a lot of Ethiopian immigrants. And the city designated this area as Little Ethiopia, and the longtime Jewish population was saying, what are you talking about? This is not Little Ethiopia. And so we were asked again to bring consensus here and bring people together. And so this is an example of facade improvements that can really capture the flavor, the personality, and the culture of the neighborhood in which you're working. So what you have here, oh gosh, sorry about that. What you have here down on the bottom is these tiles reflect the colors and some imagery from the Ethiopian flag. Now, people just driving by might not necessarily know that, but all of these Ethiopian merchants, they certainly know it, and they appreciate that, and they feel like they're represented there, and it reflects their culture, it reflects who they are, having come to this area and really invested. These are primarily all, this is a very famous one, Masab. I don't know if you've ever eaten there. I'd highly recommend it. It's great Ethiopian food. And they're very invested in helping to improve the community. And so they would like to be recognized for their culture and all they're bringing to the neighborhood. And yet what we were able to do with the street banner is, instead of it saying Little Ethiopia or just kind of blatantly referring to Ethiopia in any way, they settled on South Fairfax. So South Fairfax, SoFax is the little catchy tune. And then what this is the Ethiopian E. And so the banners go back and forth with both. And everybody was able to come to an agreement on that. It wasn't too in your face for either side. And again, they also have an annual festival that now brings both communities together very successfully and really bridged that gap and made it much more of a community feel. So kind of jumping back to the Byzantine Latino Quarter, where you saw the transit plaza, where we took out that right turn lane and made the transit plaza. Lonnie has managed a business improvement district in that neighborhood for 8 years now. And this is just an example of the importance of entities like business improvement districts. It can be critical. This is, as I mentioned, an extremely dense neighborhood. And city services are not able to keep it to the level it needs to be sanitary and just an inviting environment. So what we have focused on primarily is really maintenance services, doing pressure washing, street cleanup, trash removal, and the like. And having something like this as a supplement to city services can be very important. So business improvement districts go a long way. If you don't know what that is, they have to self-assess. They're increasing their property tax to fund supplemental maintenance services. Some use it primarily for marketing their neighborhood. Downtown, for instance, downtown LA, much of their budget goes to marketing, so to bring people into downtown. In an area like this, primarily maintenance, to keep it secure, have security out there, have supplemental street services to keep it clean. And I still have so much to go through. Okay, so this is an example. I'll just kind of briefly touch on these as gateway markers are a great way to really bring some community identity to people, to make them feel like, this is my home, I'm proud to say I live there. People don't generally say, I live in Los Angeles. They say, I live in Pico Union, I live in whatever neighborhood, I live in Palms, I live in whatever neighborhood. And so gateway markers are a great way to really make people feel like they have an identity, there's some pride of ownership there, and it's certainly a better look than the shopping bags on the other side. So urban greening, this is the half lot I mentioned before. This can be really transformational for a neighborhood. And this is just south of the BLQ neighborhood on Normandy there, Normandy and Cordova, just north of the 10 freeway. This is that half lot that has been vacant, surplus property, city has no use for it. So we got park funding to make a park out of that. And the people who live there have been instrumental in designing what it would look like. So this is supposed to represent the front porch, kind of back to what we were talking about with BLQ before. What people mostly do in that neighborhood is meet on their front porches. And so this shade sail is going to represent a porch as a meeting place again for community. In a lot of these neighborhoods, people are very transit dependent. They may not have the ability to get to a huge regional park, even if it exists, which it very often does not. And so having green spaces where children can get out and have some recreational opportunities, have outside opportunities for play is really critical. And so we've been partnering a lot with the city, with Recreation and Parks, to help out with the 50 Parks initiative to just get small park spaces in very dense neighborhoods so local kids have an opportunity to get out and play. This is the Koreatown Pavilion. This is another very contentious one where there were two groups in Koreatown, two Korean groups, that had been arguing over what they wanted to see as a gateway for 10 years. When the mayor's office asked us to come in and figure it out, get them to agree on something. And within 2 years, we had this constructed, and we actually were able to we had to scrap the whole project and start from scratch, get some trust, earn some trust there with people that it kind of wasn't rigged or whatever they thought it might be, and had people agree on what they wanted to see as an authentic Korean pavilion. Actually, artisans came from Korea, from South Korea, to do this, to construct it. It was fabricated in South Korea, brought over. There was huge ceremony with Korean dancers and food and Korean music and drums when this opened, and it's been a very key part of the Koreatown neighborhood since then. Again, a community gathering space. And more playground and the need for recreational opportunities. This was pretty much a litter box. This was cordoned off because there were about 100 or more feral cats living there, and it became completely unsafe for children to play in that sand. So we cleaned all that out, removed it all, and built this. There's adult fitness equipment there, which is great, and we're doing more and more of that so that you give parents an opportunity to get some physical activity while watching their children have their recreational opportunities. So we have adult equipment, we have tot lot, we have regular playground, and then we no longer have sand so that there are not needles or anything else that you might find in sand. So while we were doing the opening for this, the ribbon cutting, LAPD stopped by. They were just patrolling, and they came by and got out of the cruisers and came over, and I thought they might need to talk to us, and they were just, you could tell by their faces, they were just excited to be there, and they just stood in the back and watched, and afterwards one of the officers came up and said, I'm in this park at night chasing people all the time. I love to see this kind of use for this space, he said. So he was so excited that we were doing that. This is what we do as far as kind of supporting the community organizational development, just supporting people so that they can build improvements in their neighborhoods on a very localized level. We host a free community forum every year right here at USC. I would strongly encourage you all to come. When does school get out this year?
Mid-May.
Mid-May. Okay, so you can come back from your vacation because it's on June 5th. But it's well worth it, and it's a whole day, and you get breakfast and you get lunch. And it's a whole day of really just workshops and a plenary session where you just learn about different ways to enhance your neighborhood, whether it be crime prevention through environmental design we're featuring this year, community gardening. We always have a funding workshop where people can learn how to access different funds to do things like this, all types of topics. And it's usually about 400 people who attend, as I said, free of charge to everyone. So I would encourage you to come out on June 5th. And lastly, I will touch on our maintenance matching fund, which again is for organizational development to sustain the improvements that either we or neighborhoods are putting into their communities. This is a matching grant that we provide, and it can be matched with either cash or sweat equity. People can just volunteer labor, and we can give up to $3,000 to a neighborhood group to just maintain improvements, because that is one of the greatest challenges. You put in one of these improvements, there is no city budget to maintain these things afterwards. For every project we do, we have to have a maintenance plan in place before we can build it, because otherwise it's just going to fall apart. You have to have that plan in place. The city is not in a position to just maintain everything that people start building, so not these days. So the city loves it if we can add to the positive uses, but we have to be able to find a way to maintain them. So we do this matching grant, and some of the things that we'll fund is replacing street banners that, again, go to that community pride, sense of ownership in the neighborhood. So that is common. They'll start getting tattered, and people normally don't have any way to pay for a replacement. This is a perfect way to keep things looking fresh and new. We can help with murals and keeping those new. Tree wells, sometimes they get stolen, sometimes they get damaged, and so people can pay to have those replaced to keep the look good. Lot of cleanup events, to keep a neighborhood good. This is in Bandini Canyon, where we converted what was a dumping ground for things like cars and washing machines and mattresses and things like that into a park space with nature trails in San Pedro. And this is LACC, LA Conservation Corps, going out and doing a cleanup with the funds provided through maintenance matching. So that kind of thing is just critical to keep it alive. Community gardening will support these gardens by giving them, we replaced a broken water fountain, a broken gate, put in lighting, we can do planters, whatever they need to sustain a very positive use there. Putting in decorative items like this, planting trees, planting new items to keep it fresh. And the end result is really what we're looking for is to serve as a catalytic effect so that when we go in, we really educate people to build up their capacity within any neighborhood, wherever it might be and whatever the dynamics might be, so that they can go out and continue and have the tools they need to go out and continue improving their neighborhoods for the better so people can live, play, and work in a positive, safe environment. And that is the end of my story.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really enjoyed the presentation. It's good to see you. I had, I guess, 3 parts to this. The first is just some background, which I think is interesting. The second is to talk about some of the reactions that I had in terms of implied motivation for this. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of the theory of change and sort of what was the problem and what is the mechanism. And then just a whole host of reactions to what they're doing and what it might have as an implication for how we think about neighborhood change and planning and revitalization, all those things. So the first is, I didn't really know that this group emerged out of the riots. And it's interesting, there are a whole host of organizations in Los Angeles that have emerged from the riots that are still going. So in this building, the Lusk Center has the Ross program for real estate development that is a reaction to the riot and the feeling that people didn't have as much of a voice as they should in what was going on in their communities and what the trajectory of their communities should be. And this is exactly the same. So it's very interesting that maybe we should have sort of the legacy of the riots from an organizational, institutional perspective and find all those groups and bring them together and see what difference they've made or how they've made their difference. In terms of the problem, so I think that overarching all of this is this notion that there's some real isolation in Los Angeles and in urban places, and that isolation is a human-based isolation, so people are isolated, but also places are isolated. And it's interesting that if you look through the set of interventions that Lonnie does, there are some people-based things, but there are also some place-based things, trying to get them both to be more visible and more connected. And that's interesting. There's a lot of conversation, argument that happens in economic development circles. Should we invest in the people or should we invest in the place? And these are always cast as either or questions, and perhaps that's not the right way to couch this. And then the other, their reaction or their diagnosis for why this problem arose is driven by a couple of things, and their motive and approach to intervening is driven by a couple of things. The first is the principle that locals actually know what's going on in their communities, and that they could have some insights that might help inform policy and make it better, which is in some circles revolutionary, but in others common sense. The second is Oh, and just on that locals thing, that one of the challenges is to get them information at the right time and in the right mode, and then also find creative ways to draw out vision from them. Try to help organize an environment so that visions can be articulated in ways that are clear and actionable, and that can be quite helpful. The second is that small changes can have big effects, right? So when you talk to people about policy, a lot of times people swing for the fences. They want this grand project or program that's going to be hugely transformational. And I call it like swinging for a home run. But sometimes there are a lot of singles and doubles that can sort of get you along the road, and 2 or 3 singles still scores a run, right? And so, so this approach here is definitely in the smaller scale class of interventions, and the small scale can be sustained, which is interesting, and it can be catalyzing as we see through this. And then the third is a real emphasis on public spaces as assets that can transform a community. In many of these instances, the things that are being focused on are relatively small square foot areas, but they're designed to become focal points for these places in these communities and for people so that they can live differently and in a more secure and safe environment. And so those 3 things I think are important. Now, in terms of the types of things that they're doing, a couple of observations and reactions I wanted to speak to. The first is that this is very labor intensive. This is not something that you do in a month or a couple weekends through the course of the year. This is something where you have to be engaged continuously and intensively to build real personal relationships, and to also play an important translational role to help people who may not be tapped into systems understand those systems and be able to communicate with them. And that can take quite a long time. And then the other thing that they're trying to do is elicit commitment and ownership from the residents. So I was on Saturday here having a conversation with someone. We were doing some other program, and we were talking about, I was talking to Angela Blanchard, who runs neighborhood centers in Houston. And she said, one of the things that we do, 2 things that they do, which is exactly the same as what Lonnie does. One, they actually go and talk to people. So they knock on people's doors. They try to be in the places where the community is, rather than going to a ballroom and making the community come to you. And that really changes how conversations are going to go. It changes what people will be willing to do. And then the second thing that she said, which I think is important, is after you have the conversation, the next question is, well, now what are you going to do? Right? So you have to own these changes, because too often if people like me, we can swoop in all the time, but there are lots of places we can swoop to. If the people who are there full-time are not buying into it, the likelihood that this is going to succeed is pretty limited. So trying to get those sorts of commitments and a feeling of ownership is really important. In that regard, the Project Steering Committee is quite an interesting model of trying to delegate decision-making and authority to local actors, right? And so, Lonnie builds the steering committee. They find the people, but at the end of the day, the people make the judgments. They make the views. They do the votes. They have ownership, and that delegation of power is unusual, I have to say. I don't know very many movements where the leadership of the catalyzing organization so freely and willingly gives decision-making to folks outside of their organizations. Market Creek is one example of this in San Diego, where there was a community that was really engaged to own the project and own the redevelopment of the broader community. The delegation of ownership has not persisted, though. Right, so there was a struggle within the organization about who should control these things, and that led to some changes in the power dynamic. But if you really want people to own, they have to feel like they have power to change, to make change. And that was part of what drove the riots in the first place, right? And so we don't want to, if we can help it, return to those sorts of concerns and considerations. I now do governance stuff, so I was really struck by this interesting governance structure. So you have the project steering committee, but you also have these technical advisory panels. So in some way, we have a synthetic public-private partnership where you have the public sector folks, you have the community / nonprofit, and then you have the nonprofit, and they come together in a controlled way. With a particular focus, which is interesting. I really would love to have more conversation about how they came up with this and sort of what the origins of this were, because it could be a model for helping to manage communication and types of conversations on that. And then I wanted to say just two other things before closing. One is, she only said this once, but a key word in all of this is trust. And that trust is at the foundation of all of our collective action. Right? If we don't trust the folks who are with, it's hard to see a plan that's going to have a hope of lasting, because these are long-term orientations, and you really need to have those personal relationships. So all the things that are done to build trust, I think, underlie the success potential for these projects, and I think we've seen that they can be successful, particularly in a lot of these more contentious environments, right, where you're bringing together people who have argued for a long time. If you're going to be really that arbiter, you have to have credibility with all parties. They all have to trust you and believe that you stand for what you say you do. And then the last thing I wanted to say in sort of my general reactions is I really did like the notion of implementation, the long-run orientation, the matching fund, to make it clear that this is something that we want to keep going and not just have the press conference, then move on and then let it go, and that's really about viewing these as true, new, and sustaining elements of a community, right? And if it's going to be sustained, it needs to have an organizing structure that keeps it going as things happen, and so that's interesting. I don't think you see very many organizations that do that. Right? They'll do that for their own projects. They'll rarely do it for a range of projects that they may or may not be running, particularly when they're not a foundation. This is not a foundation. This is actually a different type of group, and that's interesting. The last thing I want to say is there's a lot of experience here, and there's a lot of adaptation to the environment. There's a lot of learning sort of how communities and neighborhoods are operating or may not be operating well. And I feel like there's a lot that we should be learning from them. Right? So how do they diagnose a situation? How do they identify partners, individuals who would be on these steering committees? In the last year and a half, I've had a ton of conversations about how do you cultivate leadership in communities, right? How do you identify who the right people are, and how do you give them enough information so that they can actually make good decisions and not feel like they're overwhelmed. These are really hard questions. We don't have a clear theory or model of how you do this in a sustained way, and it'd be interesting to talk more about how those things are accomplished. And then the last thing is the business model, right? So this started out of a crisis situation. It had to transform into something that is no longer crisis, right? It has to have its own stream of income, of resources, and it'd be interesting to sort of document that transition from high mayoral initiative to and you'll forgive me for saying it like this, mundane organization that just does what it does, right? And if you can keep going at that level, it has the potential to give benefits many times over. So it's really, really interesting, and thank you for the opportunity to talk.
How do you identify the people who go on the steering committees, and how do you recruit them? You talked a little about how you train them, but how, once you get a project site, how do you begin the PSC kind of process?
We have very, very close working relationships with the mayor's office and the various council districts. So we will generally approach the council district and or the mayor's office first to identify key stakeholders. The council districts always are aware of who those are. And we'll get a couple of point people, like maybe 3 names, and we'll start from there. And then we let people generally, depending on the type of project, we let people self-select, self-nominate, I should say. And then what we want to do is make sure we have a good cross-section so it's not weighted in any one direction. But we do start with the council districts. And then kind of going to what you were saying about trust and credibility, I think that kind of goes off on that point. The idea of getting people to participate and take it seriously and be invested, and getting the representation from the Technical Advisory Committee, getting those people on board, really stems from 20 years of successful projects. I think that the Technical Advisory Committee aspect has grown and built up considerably because we have we've gained credibility in their eyes over the years, because we keep building these projects that are embraced by the community, sustainable, and have maintenance plans in place. And so I think because of that, when we approach people to participate, there is a fair amount of respect for what we do, and they know that it's legitimate and that they'll see results. I think that's why in the beginning the Technical Advisory Committee portion wasn't as strong. Now we can benefit from that, from our reputation, and people are perfectly willing to participate on an ongoing basis because they respect what we're doing. And then just reaching out within the community. Once you identify a couple of key stakeholders, you go to a neighborhood council, any formal group that's in there, you start learning the names really quickly. So just need a couple key people to start. And we always involve the council office on our committees. They're always involved. It's a very important part. You want the buy-in of all the public agencies and certainly of the council district. We have people come to us all the time and say, I want to do this in my neighborhood. I want to do this. I want to build this. I want to get this done. I want to take this out. And we always say, have you contacted your council district? Because you need to start there. You absolutely need the support of the electeds.
You just alluded to that, Veronica, where the projects come from and how they get elevated and how you get engaged with them. Is that something that always comes top down? Like someone will bring someone to the council, or you direct someone to the council office and they say, hey, Lonnie, help us with this. Does your staff find stuff and bring it to your attention? And then also the relationship of that to the bigger agencies. You were talking about the bike lane on Virgil. I know that's part of LA's bike master plan, and they're going to do more of that. So sort of how do the projects start, where do they come from, and then what do they grow into with the other agency collaboration?
It's a very big question. So it is everything and then some, because it's all over the map. We have a development director who's wonderful, and she's great at finding different funding streams that would be relevant to what we do. So she was very successful in getting park money for us from the state. So we were able to do 3 new park projects through Prop 84 that expanded what we'd had in our strategic plan for a very long time with wanting to do more urban greening. We certainly recognized the need. It was a perfect fit for our model and for what we do and what we want to see improved in the communities. And then she found that there was a stream that would allow us to tap into that. So it's definitely going after that, but then also we are now increasingly in the very happy position of the city contacting us and saying, we have X dollars from whatever might be left over from something, or we have AB 1290 money because of the CRA dissolution, and we want you to do this. We want you to do streetscape. Right now, Councilman Parks is having us do streetscape improvements for his district, sidewalk improvement, and root pruning and things like that, which normally wouldn't have been the type of project we do, but the city is so backlogged that he's utilizing us because he knows he has a year and a half left in office. He wants it done throughout his district, and he knows we'll get it done because, of course, the only reason anybody would pay us an administrative allocation instead of having the city do it is because they know we can expedite things, get them done out the door on budget, on time. And so we're much, I mean, we have 8 people, so it's a little different than the city of LA trying to do something. It's very lean, mean little machine. So, so we do get money from a variety of ways where we're approached with existing funding. The Boyle Heights Arts District was through Wells Fargo Foundation. So we get some foundation money, we get, excuse me, various types of federal, state, and local money, and then we go after our own funding stream. So we do that. And there was another part to your question.
Kind of the relationship to the bigger agencies, if you develop a project at a smaller scale, does it feed up into like a faster
So
plan?
we try to find, thank you, we try to find projects that can dovetail with things like that. Combining it with the bike plan is a perfect opportunity. People, funders love to see things get leveraged. If you can show the first investment, you are so much more likely to get somebody to commit funding. So, for instance, in Boyle Heights, we have the Evergreen Recreational Center. We've, again, done multiple generations of projects there. We did a conceptual plan several years ago, and off the top of my head, I want to say there are $4 million worth of physical improvements contained within that plan. So we very intentionally broke that out into separate categories with cost estimates attached to each so that we can market that or leverage that with the appropriate funder. So we can go to Kaiser, who might want to fund something health-related, to do a fitness area, to do a jogging trail, to do adult fitness, or we can go to a parks group to do the playground and the tot lot. So we've been able to implement various portions of it by marketing that to the appropriate funder. Nobody's going to come in and say, I'm going to give you $4 million to do all of these elements. It's not going to happen. So you have to be really strategic in when you do, especially the planning portion, to make sure that we're doing it in a way that it's realistically going to get funded by different funders depending on their priorities. We had a partnership with First 5 LA that was unprecedented for us. It was a wonderful partnership, and we'd love to work with them again. We did tot lots because they do 0 to 5 programming, and they were thrilled. They had a surplus of money that they needed to get out the door. They were thrilled to be able to partner with different entities. Lonnie was one, to get these tot lots actually built. And so a lot of what they do is programming, and this was a little new to do physical structures, and it was a great partnership. And so we're always looking for new kind of innovative ways to partner with different entities. First 5 was new to us and was enormously successful.
How do you start as like a special initiative and become this ongoing organization? And then also, how did you start that process of getting the technical advisory work groups or committees? Because I imagine taking public department time is really hard to get started, and I can understand why it grew over time as that value is seen, but how do you kind of get that started?
Joyce Perkins was our founding director. She worked with Mayor Reardon to start it, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, it was supposed to be a 3-year demonstration project. Well, she had been a community activist in South LA for years and years and years, and over 20 years, and she well knew that the need exceeded a 3-year demonstration project. So that's why I mentioned that she had no intention of letting it just fade, sunset out after 3 years. She knew the need was there. She knew she could find a way to really demonstrate the value that Lonnie was bringing to the neighborhoods. And she did, and so it grew from there, and we started with just federal transportation money to improve transportation corridors, and we just grew from there. And as I mentioned with Carl's question, we knew urban greening was something we really needed to get into to provide in these communities. So now we've branched into that. We've done a lot of we're getting federal money to do the facade improvements, to really catalyze some business districts, really get that commercial angle going. And so there was plenty of need, and it was just tapping into the right sources and really also relying on the relationships with elected officials to kind of do a lot of begging. And so that's grown just in that way. But yeah, by the time 3 years had elapsed, she had definitely demonstrated the value that was being brought. And for the city, it's wonderful because a lot of the time we bring the money to the city, and it's money they wouldn't have had, it's projects they wouldn't have seen built. Like Rec and Parks, if we say we want to go apply for this money to build a new park, will you support us? They're like, sure, come up with the money to build another park. Yes, we'll take it. And that's what a lot of it is. We want to do a mural, cultural affairs, like, great, you have a budget for it, wonderful. So it really benefits the city. And so the more we built on that, the more credibility we got with showing that, yes, these projects actually came to fruition. Yes, there was tremendous community support. People were not saying, this isn't what I wanted. Of course, in any project, everyone is not going to get what they want. But absolutely, at the end of the day, everyone in one of our projects knows that they've been heard. Everybody has a voice at the table. Everyone knows their voice was respected and they were heard. So that goes a long way. Even if it isn't everything they wanted, it goes a long way in building consensus. So I think because of that, that's how we generated that trust with the technical advisory committee, where people felt it was worth their while to participate. Also, our very strong relationships with the council districts. We always have a council rep involved, and then that helps bring in the other public agencies. If there were ever to be a problem, we can have a council representative call whatever department it might be and say, we'd really like your participation in this project. Can you please attend the meetings? And so it's definitely a team effort, and everybody feeling that there's value in it, because everybody's busy. But it's been working. Whatever the reason might be, if you're constrained in being able to get out to where people are, you're going to face a much more difficult challenge. You really want to be where people are rather than bringing people to you. The model is pretty archaic of making people come to you and thinking that they'll feel comfortable and in their environment, and it doesn't work the same way. We welcome families, we welcome children to the meetings, we want their participation. We know in our neighborhoods that we're working in, we have people we're asking to come to meetings who are often working 2 to 3 jobs. They can't afford childcare. Those are just the realities of the situations. So you just have to embrace that and work within those parameters to make it successful. If you say we're going to a fancy hotel and you have this formal check-in process and very staggered seating, and it's very formalized, and no children would feel welcome, you're just not going to get the participation you need. And for people who do come, they're not going to be invested the same way. So I think that is one of the biggest lessons, is to get out to where people are and engage them in their own environment, where they can show you the things that they know far better than you do. They live there or they work there, and they can show you what they need. And it's really trusting them to know what they need. A lot of people have come to us and said, I want to be a LANI neighborhood. How can I do that? And as you mentioned, we're not a foundation. We're not a funding agency. And so there certainly is far more need than we can address. So we try to look at just the entire, because there would be no end to the potential projects out there. So we look for what's likely to be funded, what has support, what has a community group that we can work with, but that's almost never an issue. That would be, there's always somebody who wants to improve their neighborhood. Now, we did have one where we're putting in our first mid-block park in a neighborhood adjacent to Watts, and it has no recreational space near it. The area is full of children who need recreational opportunities, need green space. There's nothing out there for them. Not safe anyway to just go play out on the street, certainly not after dark. And we went to one location that had a perfect opportunity for mid-block park space. And for a while, we thought we had buy-in. There were a few young men who were like, yes, this sounds wonderful. We want this space. This sounds great. Well, then Grandma came into the picture at one of our community meetings that we did on the block, and she said, heck no, they're a bunch of thugs. They want this as a place to hang out, cause more trouble. Don't just give them more of what they're doing to destroy our neighborhood. Don't do it. And so we really then realized we'd been talking to people who had very different interests in mind. We started going door to door, talking to a lot more people, and it was overwhelmingly opposed. And although the physical space lent itself beautifully, there's no buy-in, it's not welcomed by the community, and you don't want to create something that has the potential to be utilized for completely the wrong purposes than what we're going for. So we kept looking, found another block very close by that had a house to be demoed, and we were able to use that. And in that case, that particular block, it can go block to block to block. The dynamic shifts, as you know, just one block after another, the dynamic can be completely different. And in that case, tons of small children on the street, and they were so enthusiastic, embraced it completely. The people who live on either side in the houses want to take complete ownership to just watch out, make sure there's no safety issues. They're on it to alert the police if there's an issue, and they're embracing it completely. So you do have to make sure you do have that initial level of buy-in so it can be successful. But it's, other than that, just identifying what's feasible to be funded and getting that buy-in.